On March 3rd of 1991, 4 LAPD officers caught a speeding Hyundai Excel riding alongside Interstate 210. The officers tried to take the driver, Rodney King, out of his vehicle, but were met with fierce resistance. The officers then dragged King out of his car and beat him up, almost to death, with their batons. Unawares to the officers, the whole act was being recorded. Naturally, the press went wild. They were quick to label the incident as a prime example of the white-black racism in the United States, and the people went wild. They called for immediate justice against the offenders and the LAPD, but their calls will be left unheard. The 4 officers were sent to court to be tried in February of 1992, charged with the use of excessive force and police brutality. The verdict was announced on April 29th. 3 of them were acquitted, and 1 was declared a hung jury. In layman's terms, none of them were held accountable for their actions, and they all went scot-free. Naturally, the black citizens of Los Angeles were infuriated. They took to the streets and protested. Later, they were joined by the Latinos. Later, some of the more radical sects of the protesters started to loot and burn and pillage what was in their sight in defiance of the law authorities who had wronged them. And by now, the LAPD police chief, Daryl Gates, realized that he was in some deep shit. He probably knew that he would have to resign his post in the aftermath of the King beating, but he would face even more trouble if the angry mob of blacks and Latinos were to burn the precious little shops and houses in rich white Beverly Hills and West Hollywood. So he had a very simple solution to which the city of LA wholeheartedly agreed: find a scapegoat to blame. The Hart-Celler Act, passed under Lyndon Johnson's administration in 1965, relaxed immigration of minorities into the United States, so many South Koreans moved to America in search of opportunity and success. Many of these first-generation immigrants settled in a small neighborhood in Los Angeles on Wilshire Park, an ideal setting for it was apart from the traditional racial neighborhoods in the city. The rich white people in West Hollywood and Beverly Hills were a couple miles away to the northwest, while the poor Latinos and blacks lived along the southeast in Compton and East Los Angeles. Koreatown was ideally sandwiched between these two areas, but geographic distance did not equate to South Koreans being distanced from the race conflict ever present in the city. South Koreans were disparaging against other minorities due to cases of armed robberies against Korean businesses, and they came in frequent conflict with other races, such as the whites and the Latinos, due to business competition. Race relations would be even more soured with the killing of Latasha Harlins, a 15-year-old black girl who was shot and killed by a Korean storekeeper. The storekeeper was given 5 years probation for the killing, which was also met with protests and conflict from the blacks. During the Rodney King riots, what had been a great boon for the Koreans soon became a tragedy. Koreatown's sandwiched location between the rich white neighborhoods and the poor black and Latino neighborhoods meant that if the blacks had beef with the whites, they were bound to cross Koreatown one way or another. That was the case in 1992 after the announcement of the Rodney King verdict. Thousands of blacks and Latinos took to the streets and began their trek into the white neighborhoods of northwest Los Angeles, not necessarily for justice, but for vengeance against the wrongs committed against them. And what did the LAPD and the mayor do? Call for cordiality and criticize the verdict to de-escalate the situation? Or take a hardline stance and send police to try and regain stability? They did neither. They blocked the roads from Koreatown heading to the rich white neighborhoods and quarantined the Koreans to their own fate. No message of peace or cordiality was sent by the LAPD and the city council, and no policemen were present to protect Korean businesses from the protesters, now turned pillagers. With Koreatown being sanctioned off in a cordon sanitaire by the LAPD to prevent the blacks and Latinos from flooding wealthy white neighborhoods, the Koreans had 2 choices to escape the rioters. 1, secure their stores with padlocks and flee outside the city until the riots die down, or arm themselves against the looters and fight back. Store owners who followed option 1 would return a few months later to find that their shops burned down in the aftermath of the riots, with the frustrated blacks and Latinos taking out their anger upon the Korean shops. The only ones who succeeded in protecting both their lives and their property would be the brave few who stood their ground against the looters. One of the few advantages that the South Korean heritage gave to the immigrants was their experience and affinity with firearms and military training. All Korean males had to go through 2 years of extensive military training, and many of them were veterans of the Vietnam War as South Korean volunteers to the American effort in Indochina. And since many Korean families were owners of gun shops, they were also well equipped to defend their community with rifles, pistols, shotguns, and other firearms. The Koreans led a heroic defense of their community against the mob, and despite being overwhelmingly outnumbered, the few who participated in the armed defense were able to keep their property safe. But despite this textbook demonstration of the positives of the Second Amendment and self-defense, the media was quick to vilify the Koreans for their efforts to defend themselves. They over-exaggerated accounts of self-defense by saying how the Koreans were shooting, quote, everyone and anyone, and they were quick to deflect blame by reporting how the Koreans were supposedly finishing what they had started, conveniently forgetting the fact that the media were the primary source of racial demagoguery that fomented violence in the city in the first place. And they were also quick to try and discredit the efforts of Koreans by trying to frame that their guns were unregistered, as if that had anything to do with the critical situation of the Korean defenders. And of course, no police came to provide aid to the Korean businesses at threat from the looters. Even if there were some officers on the scene, eyewitnesses reported that as soon as the shooting had started, they dove into their cars and ran away. The police, who were supposed to protect the people in the city, gave up on their jobs and their responsibility and left many Koreans at the mercy of the looters, forcing many of them to pick up arms. The suffering of Koreatown and the LA riots was the result of a catastrophic shit show of demagoguing journalists, violent mobs, incompetent police, and ignorant politicians. The chaos in America right now is an almost picture-by-picture recreation of the chaos in LA back in 1992. The police committed a heinous, disgusting crime. The black and other minorities rose up to protest and then to riot. The media played a large part in the demagoguery and sensationalization of the death of George Floyd, and the whites refused to accept responsibility for what they did and try to relegate the responsibility to other peoples. And I see a lot of comments or videos these days talking about how, the boys should come back and the Roof Koreans are dusting their Daewoo K1, along with the spread of meme images of the Roof Koreans in 4chan and other sites. But I would like to sincerely state to people who do that to please shut the fuck up. Because most of the guys who do that are whites expecting other minorities to clean up the shit that they committed. Nobody can fix this great chaos unless people stop scapegoating, stop committing violence, and actually take up the responsibility to reform the situation. And if that doesn't happen, which I fear it will, we will see more LAs, more Minneapolises, more Rodney Kings, and more George Floyds in the years to come. Good day.